So I think I'll just start by sharing a little bit about myself, just to give a little context. I am sitting in Portugal. This is my home. I've lived here for about 8 years. I'm originally from the US. I moved here with my family, and it was an intentional move to live a more conscious life, a more sustainable life in a place that was aligned with our values. I'm also from Ireland, so I have my Irish citizenship. So this continent is where my feet want to touch the ground and where I feel well in my body and soul and mind. So very grateful to be with you today from Northern Portugal. I came to Sociocracy as a mind-body therapist, a leadership coach, and I put my attention there because I realized I could only get so far working one-on-one with people, that sort of we were working together to become empowered, but then sending people back into dysfunctional systems. And that was very frustrating for me and for my clients. And I realized I have to go scale out where change can happen, where people can become empowered, and where we can create a better world. And Sociocracy for me was a solution for that. So I was one of the first cohorts for the certification training a few years ago. If you ever want to know about that, feel free to ask me. It's wonderful. And then recently I joined a cohort called Fraendi here in, well, not here in Europe, but here in Austria as well. And we're a group of consultants who work with leadership development and also organizational living strategies for regenerative futures, blending ecosystems and working at developmental levels with ecosystems. So we go from the individual leader all the way out to the multiple sectors and ecosystems that that intersect. And we're also a developmental organization. I love this image because for me, it speaks to the heart of what being a developmental organization is about, which is supporting us to, us meaning any human being working together for any purpose, to see how our perceptions help co-create what it is we're creating together. And that this kind of self-awareness hasn't really been taught in our education systems. And so we're going to talk about how to start building our self-awareness, seeing our perceptions, seeing our blind spots, and how organizations can help support us in developing that capacity. Because otherwise we're just operating from our blind spot, like that horn on every image that we see. So we'll be playing with that idea throughout the talk. And the flow will be that we'll talk about why it matters, and what is a developmental organization. And then, like I said, at the end, some more specific examples. Okay. And I wanted to also open with this quote from Otto Scharmer of the Presencing Institute. The blind spot concerns the inner source from which we operate when we do what we do. So in other words, how we show up matters. So let's talk about why that matters. Why does it matter how we show up? I want to draw from Laureen's talk, if you were there. And Laureen was giving us the context, the bigger context, the waters in which we're swimming. And a big part of that is that the world is changing so fast. And she talks about this exponential change. It's this arrow going all the way up. And that there's a kind of rift in between the external change that we're experiencing and the internal change inside of us and inside our structures and organizations. And we're all kind of feeling it. It can feel like we're barely keeping up, and it can be painful even. But I believe and feel that it's pushing us out of business as usual, this lack of stability, this constant change, so that something better can emerge. Something that's real for me in my world, in my experience, is the concept or the practice of breakdown to breakthrough. So what is it for? What might be a deeper purpose? That's for each of us to sort out. I don't have those answers, but it's one that I ask all the time. I know some wisdom traditions speak to this shift that we're experiencing, that maybe it's around consciousness. You would, from a political perspective, there's language there around what kind of shift we're in. But if we could set this hypothesis that we are in some kind of shift, and that there's a need now to prioritize learning and development right here, as you see in the middle there. And we need developmental support in order to do that. And for me, it's like, this is the call of the hour. It's like the need to shift and to transform ourselves, as well as changing externally, but we're going to kind of play with in between the internal and the external. So again, as Laureen illuminated, in this kind of shift from one paradigm to another, whatever paradigms you want to sense into that makes sense to you, in order to meet those challenges, and even the challenge of exponential change, we need to learn fast and sort of exponentially. And that's going to happen through adapting and evolving, and it will happen through doing it together, is also what a lot of researchers are saying now. And also that it's embedded in all of our ecosystems. So it's not just the individual, but also then our families, our schools, organizations, larger structures. So that's the hope, that there would be some kind of layered learning in all of our experiences, so that this can happen at really unprecedented rates and ways. So the proposal is that all these places that we live in and put our attention in can become places for us to develop ourselves. So it felt important to me to illuminate kind of the different types of challenges that we are experiencing. And you've probably seen this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. The difference between technical versus adaptive challenges. Most of the challenges we're experiencing now, many would say, are adaptive rather than technical. So technical changes are more like when you can hire an expert to help fix for you. It can be something even like changing an email system. It's something that you can acquire knowledge externally and change from A to B. You can figure it out. Usually it's more clearly defined. And because of that, there's usually less resistance. It's easier on some level. Where in contrast, you have adaptive change. These are where the more complex challenges lie. These are more of our mental models, our perceptions, our behaviors, and these are harder to define. And because they're harder to define and they require internal self-awareness, we often run into more resistance with handling these kinds of challenges. But that's also, even though it's frustrating, this can be where real transformation occurs, which can be in this context different than change, which change you could look at as from A to B. Transformation is where we're actually kind of something new emerges. And that feels important to me because that's kind of what we're needing in these times, is the emergence of solutions that we haven't even thought of yet. So I wanted to spend a minute to talk about this, what I call the invisible culture. These are where the adaptive challenges live, and they're mostly unconscious, as I said, in that iceberg kind of image. So my experience in these last few years with sociocracy is that even with good sociocratic structures in place and where power is not being abused, there are still hangovers from old systems that we've been immersed in. So I've felt it in myself and in other circles that sometimes there's projection, mistrust, or even disempowerment, even when there's a power with structure in place. And it's coming from perhaps the baggage I'm bringing from past wounds, traumas, fear of being fired, fear of being judged, rejected, kicked out, all these things we bring with us. So the structure alone won't help us get the leverage that we need within these power with structures. So that's that second point, that the power over power under dynamic is still there unconsciously, even when we change the external structures. And then there's another part to the invisible culture that I call Vuca within Vuca. So Laureen was talking a lot about the external conditions of Vuca. I highly recommend you watch her talk on the recording if you weren't there. And what I came to realize is that I am a complex being. I am a Vuca system. All human beings are. So I'm not only swimming in Vuca waters, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, but I experience those conditions inside of myself. Maybe you do too. Maybe you've noticed it in yourself. And if I bring those to a circle meeting or decision making without self-awareness, I'm not going to realize how much I might be distorting the system or a decision, or even just the energy in the room if you're sensitive to that, like some of us are. So that, combined with sort of this human condition of a natural resistance to change, which we all naturally have, that will also feed into the invisible culture when we try to bring in new structures. So these are some of the areas that a developmental organization can help us bridge. So the proposal is we blend these external structures with developing our internal capacities in layered ways within organizations, within the structures that we have. And then it becomes like the two pedals of the bicycle. Then we can really make some movements. If we tip too far one side or the other, we're not going to get the traction we need. And I feel that we're all feeling like we need to get traction. So it's like, bring in any help that we can get to the movement of creating the world that we want. So let's see. So the next place we'll go, we're going to talk about what is a developmental organization. And then after that, we'll take a pause to check in. So let's start with, this is, I'm going to be referencing Robert Kegan and Kegan and Lahey from the book And Everyone Culture. I'll put it in the resources in the end if you haven't heard of it. But what their research showed is that everyone is doing a second job for which no one is paying them. And that's their hypothesis that they're testing out. I don't know how, it's a lot of it's anecdotal and trial and error and working with organizations and tracking and really trying things out. There's no rule book for what we're talking about here, but it's definitely an area of interest in sociology and in organizational life. So the idea is that we're all trying to unconsciously preserve or enhance our personal standing. And I want you to notice if you've ever felt yourself doing any of these. Just being honest with yourself, kind of a quick inventory check. Also, maybe managing others' perception of us. Or we might be trying to cover up possible weaknesses that we have. And all of that to sometimes just trying to promote our greatest assets. Now, I know when I started working with Fraendi, it was about a year ago, these all came up for me. I mean, and I do a lot of inner work, but once you're in an organization, or once it really matters, once you're in a team, once you want to belong, you're even more passionate about what you do, let's face it, even if you're not passionate about what you do, work is personal. And so these unconscious habits or patterns or ways of being will be present unless we start paying attention to them. Hiding is part of the human condition. We naturally want to hide to protect. But this hiding has a cost. It has a cost to us. It has a cost to the organizations we're a part of and these movements that we're trying to move forward. There's a cost in energy, time, resources, and even worse, our creativity and our innovation and our ability to come up with new solutions. And it keeps us stuck in a kind of status quo. And because it's invisible, it can be tricky. It can be elusive. So on the other hand, Kegan proposes that another way of being in our workplaces. And I like this quote saying, the reason behind so much burnout in organizations is the experience of being in a plateau with your development at work. So we sort of flatline. We're kind of on that automatic pilot. And people, I always think it's just working too much that makes us burn out. But what he's proposing is the lack of vitality also behind what we're doing and how we're growing. And then we miss the rejuvenation that comes from fresh challenges that are inviting us to grow, and actually the experience of becoming a different self. So I just kind of wanted to put that in, that focusing on our growth and development as a part of our work brings a kind of pleasure and aliveness. And I'm experiencing it now in Fraendi, in these risky, scary places. What emerges doesn't always have to be risky and scary, but often it is. What's possible, though, is kind of a shared excitement and energy and movement as compared to plateauing. So here are some of the principles of a developmental organization. Just like sociocracy, we align toward a common aim. because it's not just about personal development, it's about personal development in the context of the development of what we're working toward. So the aim still needs to stay at the forefront. But what we add into the mix here is something called questioning assumptions. And we do this both individually and as an organization. So if we do this, we assume this will happen. Well, is that true? And then we test those assumptions with small, safe experiments. The other thing we do is support reflection and integration of our work-life experiences. We work to overcome our internal barriers to change. So first of all, we have to have the self-awareness to even know that there's some kind of change that would benefit me or the whole. And then what is my resistance to that? And we take stock of those things and we try to transcend them together where our blind spots are. And when we do it together collectively, there is kind of this exponential movement that starts happening faster. The real shift for me was starting to see weaknesses as prime opportunities for personal growth. Now, I get that when I'm by myself, I'm for, I don't know, 25 years, this has been a passion of mine of just the human condition and clearing the blocks and traumas so that I can be who I'm meant to be, who I'm here to be, instead of operating from wounds or limited perception. So I have fun doing that on my own time, but to make that transparent to someone else, especially in an environment that means a lot to me, where I could be judged or it could be used against me, that's a whole nother game. So this is a different kind of learning edge to do this kind of learning together. There's an inner transparency that we invite, but of course the level of that would be gauged based on the context and your culture and the agreements that you have around that. So I want you to kind of take in that list for a minute and think about what would be necessary inside a culture for any of this to work. What else would need to be present? What kind of agreements or values? I'm going to look at the chat. So what would need to be present in the room for this to work, for you to share a weakness that you might have or a learning edge you're working on? Okay, congruence with the essential flow of existence. Wow, good. Shared identity, values, scaffolding. Yep. Inclusivity, openness. Yes. Empathy. Absolutely. Not getting frustrated with the slowness. Yeah, it can feel slow. What do they call it? Kegan calls it secondary gains. You get like the slowness of exercise going to the gym, but then you get the secondary gain of stronger muscles that give you more stamina later. It's a similar kind of principle of secondary gains. Willingness to make room for new ideas in your own paradigm. Absolutely. And Pamela just landed on something that really feels at a core. They're all super important. Courage. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it can be scary. So to wrap up this section, I'm going to highlight what Pamela brought out, just because also for me, it's at the core of everything that of all that must be present in the room is trust. A culture of trust must be cultivated for any of this to work. And I mean, it has to actually exist, not just be a value or given, lip service. And it's got to be explicit as well in sort of the agreements and conditions that you set up to be a developmental organization or team on any level. This must be present for this to work. This is hot off the press from a live workshop in Hamburg, Germany yesterday with Robert Kegan. There you can see him at the bottom of the screen. And I thought this was really relevant for us today, so I threw it in. Growth at work. So what he's highlighting here is how the 20th century answers and the 21st century answers. So the way we looked at growth before in organizations, it would be for just high potential senior leaders, for example, and now for everyone, okay? Before it would have been, you know, offsite kind of things, limited, out of context coaching, now it's together at work, okay? And every day embedded practices, not just at special times. And the other big difference is that growth at work used to be associated, kind of loosely coupled with business initiatives, but really kind of separate. And now with a developmental organization, it's tightly woven in and coupled with the business imperatives, not separate. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So it's basically creating, yeah, places where we can flourish. How's your view? Is it good? Yes, I got a thumbs up from Roger. Thank you.
Yes.
Jens?
It's
Cool.
good.
Okay, wonderful. So I wanted to bring, you may have heard of this organization called Inner Development Goals. There's actually a conference this weekend in Stockholm on this. And the motivation behind forming this organization is that when we're facing challenging tasks, challenging times, there's a need for a range of cognitive and social emotional skills and other qualities that go beyond what most people normally learn in schools and higher education. And the inner development goals show these skills and other inner qualities for individuals and organizations. Just kind of set up a framework, and it was done by polling, you know, doing lots of surveys, pulling lots of different organizations and thought leaders together to try to come with a common framework, which we'll look at it in a minute. It's still going to be limiting. It won't cover everything, but it gives us maybe a starting place to build on. And it's connected to, so it's called IDGs, Inner Development Goals, and it's connected to why this is important to develop the inner capacities to build a sustainable world, connect them to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So some of the framework, just to give you a taste of it, there's 5 categories, and within those 5 categories, there's 23 skills and qualities. The first one is being, relationship to self. The second one involves thinking and our cognitive skills. The third one is relating, caring for others and the world. And the fourth one is collaborating, social skills. And the fifth one is acting, driving change. So again, I'm not going to go into detail, just wanted to point you toward this, and I'll give you a link at the end. So again, I talked about those two, the 2 pedals of the bicycle as being external structures and internal capacities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Fraendi as a developmental organization. And actually, I would say we identify ourselves as a self-organizing developmental organization, or an SDO. And this acronym was coined by, this phrase was coined by Bernard Possart and Graham Boyd. You might know Graham, part of the Sociocratic sort of network. So these are some of the things that Fraendi, we're doing inside Fraendi. We do internal developmental profiles on ourselves. We also use these with clients, but we use them on ourselves, with each other. And so it gives us feedback on our learning edges, cognitively and social emotionally. So talk about going out on those edges, you know, letting your peers and people you respect and value seeing warts and all. So it really is a different paradigm. But I can tell you, for me, it has given me such accelerated movement in my personal development than I've ever experienced before, I got to tell you. And I have spent a lifetime focused basically as a coach and a therapist and a seeker. I have spent a lifetime on inner development, and this has been really pivotal for me to start using some of these new ways of discovering learning edges, let's put it that way. We also internally have developmental communities we call pods, where we work with our edges that we're aware of and the assumptions that we might be working with. those places where we don't really see on the edges so well, or we're assuming something will happen. We work with those together transparently. We are also a sociocratic organization. Obviously, that's that self-organizing part. We really focus on this power within, obviously, to have power with, and I'll talk a little bit more about that before we end, hopefully. And we also do something movement among roles, and I don't just mean sociocratic roles like leader, facilitator, secretary. I mean like your job. So what you're focusing on, part of being a developmental organization, what's proposed is that you don't have people-dependent roles, but that you get good at something and then you get moved to doing something else. And I think SOFA might do some of that. It creates that sort of challenge, so you're feeling more alive and you don't plateau out without overstressing. It's that sweet spot that we're looking for. And again, one of the principles is that that we practice is, and it's from Kegan and Lahey from the book, is like nothing extra, that bake these practices into the culture. It's not extra time spent, outside of work. They're just embedded with inside meetings, everyday culture. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say there. I don't think so. Okay, so basically we're creating the conditions for development. Okay. So here are, I have more detail. Okay, good. Remember what we have here. So here's some of the laundry list of some of the practices that we bake into our culture. And we really do call them experiments. There's no rule book for this. This is really pioneering stuff. And we're creating, not we, Fraendi, or me, we as a collective, and whoever wants to swim in these waters, we're creating this. We're making it up as we go, really, and through experimentation and then iteration and feedback, just like sociocratic ways. The first section really talks a lot about trust building and connection, obviously like sociocracy with rounds and check-ins, having open sharing and reflective moments, encouraging vulnerability as appropriate and self-gauged. Obviously, there's no expectation or pressure. Basically about nurturing community. Another thing that we do, though, in this next section is naming developmental tensions that might be in the room, like I'm feeling an edge around this. And it takes a little while to get used to, but when someone's modeling it, it becomes easier. And when you see that it was safe, not only safe to do, but that, wow, we make so much more progress when they are named instead of not named. You build your courage with time. We also consciously work with polarities. We call them out and explore them. I mean, one of the polarities, and I know that's very sociocratic as well, so there's a lot of bridging here. One of the polarities, in Fraendi, we work with all the time is being emergent and having structures. And, we don't always do it well. I was going to say, well, it can get messy. It's like we want to be emergent and fast and agile, but yet we also need structure. So how do we do that? And sometimes we feel polarized around that. And so we're always calling it out. We're partners in each other's developmental growth. Like I said, asking for accountability and feedback, very sociocratic, but it's going to a deeper level of sociocracy. Also, it's baked into all layers of the organization, not just for some. And another really unique feature at Fraendi is that we build in value for our work on our development. We have an internal value exchange system and a very unique way of handling money. And at some point, we'll put out a case study on this. We're still very much in experimentation mode, but we do build in value. When you ask for your contribution request, there's places to name where you brought value around development and value to the culture. And lastly, just to walk the talk, obviously, and that's what we're trying to do. So let's keep going, just about 5 more minutes. We'll go to questions. So then that was all internally. So then we walk the talk, bringing it out to our clients. It's like an infinity sign, working within and then bringing it out to others. So again, the developmental profiles, we work with clients, bringing that to them, bringing them feedback on their learning edges, and then how to move forward through developmental coaching, developmental learning spaces or pods, as they might want to set those up. We help facilitate those and then let them just take off on their own inside the organization, so they're not over dependent on any one person or even a consulting model. It's all about empowering the client. And then there's these last 2 bullets I just wanted to include because they're really unique and they really do relate to development. And this is this culture mapping process that we do. There's something called cultural due diligence, and what we can do is kind of help people. I had a note about this. I wanted to just. Yeah. It really helps when you're want to manage like more dynamic, large scale cultural assessments. So I have an example of that, and I wanted to just tell you really quick. So we worked with a client who was one of the companies who were helping build the tunnel between Switzerland and Italy. And they were really concerned about the two cultures of each of those divisions. Obviously, would it work? And what would be some of the blocks to moving forward productively? And so we did a culture mapping process, and it's all through stories, because we have found it's the most holistic way to invite in kind of warm data, to use that phrase from Nora Bateson. And through this culture mapping process, we discovered that the issues weren't really they were very much culturally compatible. The issues were really with the combined senior leadership team. So without disclosing it, so it just can reveal a lot. The stories really reveal that invisible culture that's there. And then we feed that also into a platform. So we have an app and a platform that can track these stories and help an organization to track and grow and develop what's happening in their culture through stories. I think that was it for that. Okay, so just wrapping up, bringing us back to our rhino, this idea that the why development matters is because how we show up matters. And unless we're willing to look at what we're seeing and perceiving based on our own perceptions, we might just keep creating the same patterns over and over. And that the way we'll make the most traction is by doing it together. And for me, it really reduces this risk of like, shiny package, like the same package, but the same like patterns, but with a different package. So if we bridge the internal and the external, we have a better chance of getting these results that we want. And as Otto Scharmer says, form follows consciousness. So it does kind of bridge back to our own internal self-awareness. And just quickly wanted to touch on a diagram that Laureen helped me create from the way that I've worked with myself on this and with others. And someone asked in the last talk about how do you create, power within. For me, I've been focusing on this power with idea, because I noticed for myself that when I started studying sociocracy and looking at power with, even looking in my family, looking everywhere, I saw, wow, I'm still disempowered in many places, and I'll never get there unless I keep looking at those shadows or places where I'm disempowered. And what that looks like, what it can look like, is going up this mountain and back around, because whenever we take action for something toward a purpose, we're going to have tension or conflict. And when we do, or if we do, or any kind of internal trigger or limitation or fear or block, we start to increase our self-awareness and connection. That's that sun, if you come around to the left side here. And up around at the top, we start to transform those patterns. Our self-awareness increases and our power starts to increase. And you see the sun coming inside the body. And that's where we will have, in the bottom right corner, these empowered with potentials together. So I'll close with my mantra, which is you can't have power with unless you have power within.